Hello and welcome to the Spare Change podcast. Today I'll be discussing the impact of media on personal finance and global economics. To start, I have a study from 2018 by Alliance Generations Ahead. And basically some of the things that they discuss are generational impacts of financial tools, how confident or not confident generations are, and the impacts that social media has on finances and in general perception of economy and saving. One of the first points that is made is that millennials are on their way to being in better financial shape than other generations. This is based on a percentage point out of the group that they studied. 77% of the folks that were millennials said they felt financially confident versus 64% of Gen Xers. And then they continue on to say that the median retirement savings and contributions are on par or greater than that of Gen Xers, as much as 12% higher on a monthly basis in contributions to a 401k. And some of the other concepts that they discuss are tools that millennials use. And this is something I've discussed before. Millennials are more likely to be inclined to use fintech and other technology in order to push forward their investing and savings and how they manage their money. But as much as there's a good side, there's also a negative side. So a lot of millennials experience fear of missing out or FOMO. I'll follow that to say there's also a huge amount of fear, uncertainty, and doubt within the younger community, because if you don't know what you don't know, then there's a lack of access to financial knowledge. And I think that's one of the biggest problems in the age range of 18 to 30. There's a huge discrepancy in the availability of financial knowledge in those groups. So a lot of what is talked about as well is the perception on social media. A lot of folks only put their best foot forward and only present the positives that they experience on social media. And that leads to a lot of almost keeping up with the Jones type mentality, where there's an 88% figure of millennials that believe social media creates more of a tendency to compare wealth or lifestyle versus 71% in Gen Xers. So the younger and younger of an audience that social media is achieving, it also has an impact in that audience of financial inadequacy and perceived comparison between other users. Let's say you see someone on Instagram and they've got a nicer car than you. Well, how does that make you feel about your success if they're younger than you and you have less than they do? Some of those like little granularities you don't expect to impact the way people budget, spend, and save. But if you're trying to keep up with someone else based on assets and material things, then you might end up in a worse financial situation because of the post you saw on social media. And that can pose a larger problem. That can pose a larger problem for folks who are just trying to really begin in the world of personal finance and make their first steps. So another thing they discuss is that only 40% of millennials are connected with a financial professional and work closely with them. But even that is higher than the rate of Gen Xers, which only 25% had a financial professional that they communicate with. One of the top forms of communication with a financial professional is still in person over using phone communication or online. Those are half or less of the figures that are put up for in-person financial counseling and financial professionals consulting the millennial generation. One of the things they also highlight is the top issues millennials want help with. Those include having enough money to last as long as they live, help to plan, set, and achieve a secure retirement, understanding the big picture of their money, spending, saving, and retirement, help to create a true life map of where they want to go and how they'll pay for it. So if those are the concerns of millennials, how do we address those concerns in a world that is increasingly connected in a digital landscape and increasingly disconnected in a physical landscape due to things like COVID or lack of ability to travel? There's all sorts of restrictions on personal communication, and being in the now in a physical space, we've been increasingly limited in that, and we've seen issues in the past that have caused us to become more distant from other folks, and highlighting that key fact that in-person connection with a financial professional provides more consistency in the willingness to continue getting that support. So if there's decreased support and there's not as many answers to their questions, they'll seek advice elsewhere. And that's one of the things we'll be covering, because that advice might not be perfect. Okay. So some of the impacts that social media has, one of the things I wanted to highlight is a lot of the economic impacts of social media fall into short-term and long-term. And then media has planned effects and unplanned effects. So we'll focus on short-term for now. Short-term can include things like a media campaign, setting an agenda, propaganda, and those are the planned effects, things like that. If we imagine there's a media campaign to increase consumer spending on XYZ product, that can have an economic impact if enough attention is garnered for it. Then there's things in the short term: individual reaction, collective reaction, policy effects. So when you see economic policy in place, things like restrictions on gas vehicles and pipelines, that can impact the prices of gas. Also, if you incentivize electric vehicles over gas vehicles, it can significantly impact the prices of not only those vehicles, but the gas and goods that are produced by companies that use those resources as well. So if you think the majority of shipping companies aren't running electric fleets or hybrid fleets, your bottom line as a company is now being chipped away by policy. So you have to increase the price of goods. And when you see an increase in consumer goods and consumer spending, and the demand isn't letting up, but the prices have increased. Then you start to see that inflection point, and it's followed by a recessionary period, and the inflationary rates of goods. Those are all things we're seeing now, based on things like policy, war overseas that we don't really have as much stake in, but it still affects our global economy. And then with social media and news media, those constant reminders that, hey, there's a problem, there's a problem, there's a problem, can influence daily behavior of consumers, which doesn't assist the issue by any means. And I think that one of the biggest problems that we're going to run into is the more that we hammer home the inflation is, oh, it's not an issue, or the more the media propagates this idea that we're not in a recession, or we're not in a period of economic difficulty, and that savings is increased and people are changing the way they work, working from home, they're spending less and saving more, and those might not necessarily be good economic indicators, because when people spend less, it's because they don't have the money typically, and the increase in the price of goods and reliance on government programs and reliance on things like a stimulus, those are not necessarily good indicators for the economy. If we focus more long-term, things like social control and institutional change, cultural and social change, those are unplanned effects of media in economics. If you see a cultural change, it might be tied to something like the distribution of knowledge, i.e., stating inflationary rates, and then people are very reactive to those things in the short term, and then that reactive behavior becomes a new cultural way of dealing with a situation. Recessionary periods aren't necessarily a quick time. It can last years, and I think that's where those behavioral changes will begin to appear, like ride sharing with Uber, and good Lord, there's helicopters over my house. But ride sharing with Uber, or using things like Groupon or savings apps and fintech, when you see those behaviors start to multiply at a rate that was unexpected, it might mean that that's a negative indicator for the economy. But I mean, I'm not an expert. I'm just presenting ideas here. So the next thing I want to talk about is the behavior impacts of media on an audience and in society. So if the contact of media with sources in society is unmediated, then often the reality starts to see a disconnect. So audiences will receive things from media and public sources of information. They'll take it to heart, but also so will other people, and then society begins to act differently. So you see that reality change and shift based on things that you're being fed from media sources. And a lot of people don't find the connection for themselves, and they don't look for further information. They don't they take a lot of what media does at face value, and that can cause a huge open field for misinformation and disinformation. So that audience response and the direct personal experience as it changes based on the impact of media can often create a delineation from what might be the expected result of a media campaign. So things that I want to talk about as far as misinformation and disinformation. Disinformation is purposely false. Things like, let's say, a deep fake of a politician influencing the people of a country. For instance, President Zelensky telling his people to put down their weapons to let Russia proceed with their objectives. It was spotted quickly, but that impact might have still cost a few lives and changed a very one-sided situation into something that was advantageous for the opposition. And then intentionally created like rumors, conspiracy theories. I like to thank Alex Jones when I hear things like that, because you know it's not a perfect world. Some things end up being true, but when you reach so far that you're not utilizing evidence, and now you're outside the realm of valid sources and valid information, but you continue to propagate an idea based on emotion and reaction to an event that you don't have all the information on, and then someone else propagates it further with negative intent, that can spiral out of control. And people who fall for that are often misinformed, and they take the information at face value, because if you read it on the internet, it must be true, right? And then things like misinformation, that's less intent and less purpose behind it. Often statistics or satire and jokes that get taken as fact, that baseline information that's received, and then people view it as tangible and real, can often creates a delineation from reality, and that deviation can often cause economic harm, and it can cause a negative response, not only in that direct community, but it can be worldwide. Things go viral, and things are much more quickly propagated throughout social media and the internet. I.e., for a reference, TikTok investment gurus, they might be teaching you something that is a valuable investment strategy, or they might be teaching you how to commit tax fraud. So some instances of stock market rises and falls from fake news. A Twitter user impersonated the Russian interior minister. Sorry. And tweeted that Syria's president had been killed or injured. And as a response, the prices of crude oil and oil companies rose by over $1 USD. And then let's see a more recent, let's say 2019 BlackRock on this chart. It says news outlets were duped by a letter purporting to come from Larry Fink, CEO of investment firm BlackRock, leading to fluctuations worth hundreds of millions of dollars. If such little propagations of information, if they hit the right sources and they're further seeded throughout a community and spread, it can cause investment decisions, and ultimately it can cause the loss of capital for not only companies, but investors. And then someone at the bottom line will eventually eat those costs in the increased cost of a product, or companies might react in a negative way and it might impact shareholders. And just things to think about when we talk about something as simple as a tweet can disrupt the economic balance of a commodity in a heartbeat. So the next slide that I'm going over is the political impact of disinformation and social media. So social media campaigns often cost excessive amounts when we talk politics, i.e. the US spending 10 billion for its most recent campaign, and that's an estimate. And then the spending on fake news is less significant in proportion, but still very significant. The US spent 200 million, which accounts for 50% of spending in fake news during an election campaign. And the total global election campaign from the most recent 10 countries, 8 countries, I can't really count right now. Let me look. Lord have mercy. All right. I think it's nine countries are on this list. They accounted for 400 million. I'll include my sources because, again, not an expert, but just going over the idea that spending on fake news creates an economy for fake news. That fake news then gets propagated. It's almost an ad campaign for bad actors to create disruptions in economic balance, political balance in the world, and that can cause huge issues for not only policy change, but day-to-day consumer price index and flows in the economy, where we might see economic booms under an elected official that are completely artificial, and they get credited with restoring pieces of the economy. Or you can see, oh, there's an economic downturn and it's all this guy's fault because XYZ, when in reality, there's a huge market for fake information and disinformation campaigns that may also be influencing some of the things that we're seeing in our economy. So some of the global impacts and some of the global efforts to respond to misinformation and disinformation campaigns. We'll start with the US. The Mueller report cost $32 million to analyze issues including fake news and effect on election interference. And then in the UK, the House of Commons Digital Cultural and Media and Sport Committee published an inquiry and report on disinformation and fake news. So it's obviously an issue more than just in the US, it's a global thing. And then let's see, Chinese authorities in August 2018 launched an app that lets people report potential fake news. Imagine if independent fact checkers on Facebook taking down posts that have the word vaccine in them. Imagine if it was everyone's job to report fake information or potential fake information. I'm not sure if we would all just continue to fall for it, or if there would be a better response to things that are just untrue. From my perspective, I think a lot of people would still be falling for it because it's hard to verify if you're in the schoolhouse and the school of thought that, oh, well, yeah, I read an article, it's got to be true, but you don't check any of the sources and don't dig any further. You just take everything at face value. Some of the totals are rather staggering. So stock market losses and volatility, $39 billion. Misinformation and just in the US, financial misinformation, $17 billion per year. Public health information in the US alone, $9 billion. Online platform safety spending, $3 billion total. Brand safety, 250 million. That's the baseline. And again, this is as current as possible, but obviously these numbers have probably gone up as we see things like the war in Ukraine and COVID start to propagate more and more false information. But the total economy and the total addressable market, if you would, for fake information, it totals in excess of $78 billion total. And just imagine a $78 billion market isn't much to like wag a finger at when we're talking about the amount of impact that you can receive from that much marketing. If a company spent $78 billion in marketing, they would inevitably reach such a large audience that no matter what, they'd always hit their, like they would pretty much always hit their quarterlies. You know, you see such a large number, and it's spent on keeping people out of the loop and not pushing the truth. So I think it's really critical and important to focus on the information you're receiving. Don't look at social media to be your beacon of knowledge. Just because someone shows a video of them driving around Lamborghinis doesn't mean they have all the financial knowledge in the world. And just because you read an article that some prime minister in some country got shot doesn't mean that it's true. There's a huge market for lies, and lack of a better word, bullshit is a huge economy, and people love to spread it. It'll continue to spread unless there's something done about it. But the main idea is be safe with the information you consume, and be very aware of the idea that not everyone is acting in your best interest. If you don't have the knowledge, seek it. If you don't have a plan, at least take actions that are in your best interest. Talk to someone who does know a little bit more than you about financial resources and financial activity. And if you're aware that something isn't true, don't be that guy and spread it, you know? All in all, if you have any questions or you're not sure about something, I might not have the answers, but you can ask me. Feel free to like, follow, and rate this podcast. Share it if it's on YouTube or on Spotify or something. Have a great day. Hopefully I shed some light on the market for fake information and how social and news media influence our financial decisions. All right. Bye-bye.